Right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Cowan from the Financial Services Forum, and welcome to our webinar event this afternoon, which we've called Closing the Gap in Campaign Execution. So the forum has teamed up with Blueprint X, and we are going to hear from a combination of speaker from Blueprint and two client-side speakers sharing their experience of implementation of a new execution platform. So really pleased to welcome you all this afternoon. And this is a culmination of some work that we've been doing with Blueprint over the last 2 months or so, when we actually did some research, and I'm delighted that we've had a good number of our client-side members complete that form, and that is going to be published tomorrow as a white paper, and that will be sent out to you as people who have dialed in and registered for this webinar this afternoon. So look out for that white paper that's going to follow this webinar this afternoon. So this is all about strategy and implementation through to measuring performance and impact, and how we can better understand the gaps and potential compliance challenges associated with campaign execution. And that's really what this is all about. It is about campaign execution. So it's a slightly different focus on marketing from our normal areas of brand and content and everything else. But I think nonetheless, we did get great take up in the research, and we've got a really good number of people registered and dialed in for this afternoon. So it really indicates the level of interest in the whole area of campaign execution. So I'm now going to hand over to Kieran Noonan, who's from Blueprint X. So please listen carefully. There's a lot of information to go through, but the format that we're going to use is that Kieran is going to, he's got a slide deck, and he's going to present that in 3 distinct parts. And please listen very carefully, and there'll be natural breaks at the end of parts 1, 2, and when we get to 3. So please get some questions in. All the questions are anonymous. You can tap away on your keyboard, get them in, ask Kieran, and ask our 2 experts from the client side who have had real experience of implementation of this workflow platform. So please get involved with your presentation, with your questions. So I'm just going to whip through the introductions. So you've heard enough from me already. I've already introduced Kieran Noonan, but I'm really delighted to introduce from the client side. We've got David Reeve, who's Global Head of Marketing Operations for BNY Mellon, and Ashley Carson, who's Marketing Operations Manager for BNY Mellon. On the investment management side, I think need to make that clear. So for now, that's it from me, and I'm going to hand over to Kieran, who'll take you through the presentation and engage in a conversation as he goes through this with David and Ashley. So over to you, Kieran.
Excellent, thank you very much, David. So just a few additional comments from me. So my name is Kieran. I'm the EMEA-based delivery manager, and I head up our workfront and work management practice, where we facilitate the preparation, design, and implementation of software solutions for sales and marketing. This presentation will touch, for the most part, on the key findings of the white paper that was built out in conjunction with the Financial Services Forum, and tackle 2 particular points, being consistency and actual execution of campaigns. And then just to echo something Dave was saying before, even though this is focused on campaign execution, we can look at this as a wider picture piece, because it's all about process and execution of workflows within the marketing or sales environment. I don't know if David and Ashley, if you wish to kind of do a quick intro yourselves. If not, I'll just move on to the next 2 slides.
Yeah, happy to, Kieran. So David Reeve, and yes, we've been working with Blueprint to deploy this workflow and process platform. So looking forward to kind of sharing the experience with you.
And Ashley Carson here. So I kind of helped a lot worked alongside Kieran in terms of actual implementation on the ground, working with all our teams globally to implement Workfront.
Awesome, excellent. So let's just move on. So the next slide is the agenda slide, and this is basically these three topics. As Dave mentioned earlier, we will have this natural break in between the first, second, and third section of this webinar. I greatly appreciate any participation, questions, no matter what they are, and then we'll tackle them at the end of the call in section or part 4 of this conversation. So the first slide is a quick introduction to Blueprint, who we are and what we do. So Blueprint, we've been around for about 12 years supporting the implementation of MAP solutions, facilitating sales and marketing through their strategic and operational needs. And then over the course of those years, we've kind of expanded with our offering, one tool in particular called Workfront, which is a workflow management tool, and we'll talk about that a bit later on in this session. We also have on the call BNY Mellon, so obviously the investment management firm. David, is this something you'd like to talk to? A quick introduction.
I think you go ahead. I mean, I think you can read from there. It's BNY Mellon. I guess most of you're aware of us, and yeah, thanks, Kieran. I think that's the context.
Okay. So I think this brings us now to the pertinent piece in the first section of this webinar, and the key points that I'd like to discuss further. It's on the screen. We realized from going through the feedback and digesting the white paper, the webinar, the survey for the white paper, that we have these two pieces, these two components. Now, the first section here talks to the confidence of CMOs and in the consistency of execution, and the second section, part of this sentence, 4% are satisfied with execution efficiency. Now, these two components drive value to any business and are a direct contributor to performance. And I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about what this actually means. So I want to make sure that everyone understands this is only one component of a successful process governance and process management or workflow management within a business. And that sadly we can't tackle everything. It would be far too long, but this could be part of a wider conversation. If anyone has any further questions or would like to discuss anything relating to this topic that you feel is not covered, please reach out to me directly through LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to jump on a call and discuss this any further. So without further ado, I'd like us to talk about this piece now. What I've done here is I've tried to break down execution consistency and what that actually means. So I've taken a 3-step approach, and I've broken execution consistency into its 3 components. First of all, from a human aspect, knowing the right processes and when to execute, being crucial and very, very important for a successful business. The second component, doing the right process in a repeatable way, which means being able to replicate and produce predictable outcomes. And then the third piece is then the continuous improvement upon existing processes and procedures, making sure that we grow with times and that the business matures in its day-to-day execution of tasks, in particular in the realms of marketing as part of this webinar. Now, when we talk about the right processes and when to execute, more so with recent economical circumstances reshuffling our organizations, it's important to look at how people identify what needs to happen and when. Now, the crucial part is to make this part of, for example, an onboarding journey. When you have people moving around within the business from one department to the next, everyone is kind of set in their ways. You have new hires who come on board. You have people who've changed departments, for example, who coordinate them with different departments within sales or marketing who have their own kind of rhythm. And typically each business, or each department, they all have their own tools, right? And what we want to try and do is kind of bring some sort of unify people, so there's sense of unification, and bring people together in one platform or through processes internally. Again, making sure that everyone knows how to work and what to do at any given point in time. Now, the best way to do this is a common ecosystem or system and software suite, allowing people to exchange and coordinate within that one environment. Now, doing the right processes in a repeatable way has its ties into both existing processes, and so legacy processes, and then new processes that we roll out internally due to changes in either software, new technology, or clients, or processes because of an organizational strategic change of some sort. And it's kind of hard to push these changes through the ranks in a way that makes people adhere to them consistently. We typically see things such as email exchanges or PowerPoint documentation, maybe in some cases Excel spreadsheets that are shared with people. And the expectation is that people kind of naturally follow these steps, right? They've received a PDF file, maybe a knowledge-based link where they kind of read up and say, okay, we need to do this. And what happens is it's adhered to for the first few weeks, but then gradually over time it kind of slips, right? And then that adoption is lacking, and then demonstrates gaps in the process itself, and that feedback and forth between how things should be done and how things are actually done becomes bigger and bigger. So ideally, what we want to do to prevent that from happening is to insert some system of monitoring, allowing us to kind of observe and see how people are working through the process steps, are working through them, and how the teams are being, how their performance is impacted by these changes. Now, one thing I do want to mention in terms of doing the right thing and consistency is to focus on the 70%, right? It's not about getting everything exact and everything perfect. It's about having the biggest impact with the lowest amount of changes, if that makes sense. So by focusing on something that's about 70% accurate or acceptable, you will get better and you'll get better results than trying to get everything 100%. And that also impacts the execution and the rollout of new technology, procedures and regulations internally. Now, the last point in relation to continuous improvement is that feedback loop. When we roll out changes, and again, when we send out PowerPoint decks, presentation, Excel spreadsheets, all these things, it's sometimes hard to get feedback. Feedback comes through on an Excel spreadsheet from one individual to the next through an email exchange. It could come through chat groups, let's say Slack, for example, or Microsoft Teams. But it's hard to kind of combine all these and make sure that the right people receive the right communication at the right time to influence change and tailor these procedures or processes, again, to add value into the business. And so that's something we'll tackle, we'll go through on the next slide. So I hope everyone can see this. This slide is a typical process map. It's cross-functional, and in this case, high-level process. This is the dream state, at least in terms of campaign execution. So you can see if we follow from the left to the bottom right, the high-level steps from initial brief submission. In an ideal world, all requirements provided up front. The marketing team, in this case, have a step where they would quality check and control the input, make sure that they have everything, make a decision on whether to accept or reject that initial that marketing request. Ensures that the delivery is on time through the correct information being handed over to the different teams, which could be anything from designers, copywriters, compliance teams, and so on. We'll have the accountability and responsibility clearly owned. Everyone knows what they are tasked to do, when they are tasked to do it, along with the due dates and deadlines for said tasks. Now, in theory, in a dream state, that means that each and every project will be delivered on time, within schedule, within budget, following a consistent and predictable output process flow. Now, reality is that's not how these things happen. There is a lot of back and forth between teams, a lot of exchanges when, for example, requirements are missing, and this kind of breaks down the overall process and prevents us from hitting our milestones again within schedules and within budgets. Now, it's important to know to understand that we're not simply replicating existing processes and procedures. But we need to look at its individual components and then expand upon those. Okay. Now, the benefits we would get from a consistent, if we could bring everyone to the table following this particular process, would be these. So we would manage to achieve a faster campaign launches, improved performance, less time would be spent chasing deliverables. We drive greater accountability within the business, better predictability, we get better results, financial and on-time delivered projects. And so ideally, we want to bring everyone to this kind of model and have everyone in the business look at a process or workflow as one unit, right, all together. It's not broken out into their own individual components where people say, okay, these are my duties, these are my tasks, right? It's important that everyone understands what role they play and where they fit into this bigger picture. Now, this brings us nicely into that natural kind of pause. We will now go on to BMY and their vision and view and why they felt the need for bringing on board a workflow management solution. So just to echo David's comments from earlier on, if you do have any questions on those first few slides, please feel free to share now, add them to the comments section, and then we'll try and answer those at the end of this call. David, I feel this is a good point to hand over to you in terms of BMY and your vision.
Yeah, thanks, Kieran. I think thanks for that intro, and you talk about the sorts of things that we're looking to achieve very well there. I think if I take a step back before diving right into the world of campaign execution, clearly, as a marketing operations function, one of the things that we're trying to do is really maximize return on marketing investment. So you think of that as our end goal. We look at the whole marketing technology stack, we look at how people work, and then we want to measure what are the outcomes of all of this work. And so what we've tried to do here is break that down into the component parts. So clearly one part is, we have budget that we spend, we want to know what that is and what we're spending on. We have people in the team that are working. So are we prioritizing our work in the right way? Have we set them up for success with good process? And are we improving that so that we are quicker to market, we are able to be efficient in what we're doing? And of course, ultimately we want to join that with up with the business results that we are achieving. And our kind of MarTech stack, if you like, needs to have the same kind of naming conventions and ways of classifying things all the way throughout. So we want a good data infrastructure there. But what if we go back to what it was that we were trying to achieve, it really started. If we look at the timeline at the bottom of this slide, it really started with us trying to do a full review of how teams were working. We're global, so a team in North America. We have the EMEA team, APAC, and everyone has slightly different ways of working. There are some central teams that should be supporting across the globe, and then regional nuances and so on. So it's really important that we really hope we built an understanding of what's actually happening out there, how people are working. And following that, I think that's where the kind of vision formed around trying to bring teams that have their own processes, as Kieran alluded to, together, integrating different stakeholders at the right part of the journey. So from campaign idea through to getting it done and implemented using, say, a marketing automation platform or getting something out on the web. So really, in breaking that down, what we identified were lots of teams had lots of good processes individually. We have teams where actually processes weren't documented. And then, in combination with that, obviously in our environment, there's a lot of compliance-related tasks and approvals and so on. So of course we had systems in the past as a combination of Excel, other systems purely from a compliance perspective. But what we wanted to do is bring those groups together and have a pretty slick end-to-end process, and also align that, as I said, with how we categorize how we're spending the money and also how we track the results of all of this activity. So I think with that in mind, we then went to market, if you like, to look at, well, what are the platforms out there, and looked at a few different options. But one of the key things that we wanted to ensure was that we weren't going to do something that was siloed within marketing. So in our evaluation, we brought other parts of the business into the discussion. So whether it be sales, or head of global distribution, so on, to articulate why we needed this from a marketing perspective, but also how this could potentially expand wider within the business as it grew, and the fact that it was scalable. And that was pretty much one of the key reasons for kind of looking at Workfront ultimately as the platform. Now, of course, as probably a lot of you have experienced in the past, it takes a while to onboard a new supplier, go through procurement, do all of those components, and I think we're probably pretty typical from that perspective. But one thing I would say is that actually running in parallel, right? So if you take the kind of technology out of the equation here, running in parallel a work stream around understanding and documenting current processes, refining some of those to some extent, and to Kieran's point earlier, 70% is probably good enough. We'd probably say maybe more like 80, unless it's compliance where it would need to be 100% accurate. But document those and have that ready in parallel prior to kind of implementing a system, because that's where the hard work is in a lot of this. And really that kind of sales pitch internally within marketing, that's clear, because from an individual marketer's perspective, you make their life easier day to day, have a system of record for them to go to. I mean, I like to think of it almost as if you're a salesperson, you go into salesforce.com and your sales process is laid out for you there, and that's where you operate. Marketers typically don't have that. I think that's what we're bringing to the marketing team now, is almost the equivalent of that from a marketing perspective, which is when you kind of log in the morning, you go in there, you can see the projects that you should be collaborating on. There might be kind of inbound briefs, as Kieran mentioned, and requests. But really, that's where you're planning and managing your work, and also connecting with your colleagues. So selling that from a kind of individual perspective, I think that was pretty easy given the findings that we had. Then from a kind of management perspective, clearly what we're expecting to see here, and what we are already seeing, and no doubt Ashley will cover that when we get onto her, but is actually what our team's doing with their time. Is it actually linked with where our strategic priorities are? Where are the bottlenecks, and where can we help continuously improve those processes to move forward? So we were able to demonstrate, the types of reporting that we would get to the XCO and so on, in order to get the sign off for this. And I would say that then getting sign off and making that business case really critical part of it. But ensuring that you're then tracking what are those improvements, and we'll come on to that, I guess, as we move on to a discussion with Ashley. I just want to really quickly just touch on a couple of points around then implementation, which is that clearly with any technology deployment, one of the measures of success, one part of it is going to be adoption. And I think that it's very important to focus on that, focus on the training that you're delivering, and hand-holding people through it. But as Kieran mentioned, I think you have a balance here around perfection and building out a project plan that might take 1 year to try to get to perfect processes, which we know will have changed by then anyway, or putting a stake in the ground, launching and going. We haven't solved everything with this, but what we have done is we've enabled teams to operate more effectively in their silos currently, and start to join up how they can work together more effectively. So we focused on getting it operational, having people adopt and hand-holding. And as that's happening, people are starting to find for themselves ways in which they can use the platform and start to give feedback. I mean, I won't steal Ashley's thunder, because there are a bunch of examples of how we've been able to do things more quickly. We've identified problems that were there before. They were just hidden in email, buried, and evolved them. So really the whole go live piece of this has been around managing adoption. And of course, we need to continually sell the benefits, give people value back in terms of the management information that they're getting. But I would say one tip from us here is that we've actually also incorporated this within all of the marketers' objectives around this being the system of record. So it's the kind of adage that you'd hear, sales teams say around Salesforce, if it's not in there, it doesn't exist. We have the same kind of mantra around Workfront for marketing. If it's not in there, it doesn't exist. And that's really helped to drive people's desire to learn the platform and also the value that we're getting from it, because people have really then started to kind of collaborate. And one other kind of final point there is celebrating the successes. And there will be bumps in the road where processes need refinement and we need to do quite a lot of change initially so that people are happy with how it's running. But celebrate the successes and the people that are going out of their way to make it a success. So I will pause there, Kieran, and hopefully that gives a view of how we've approached it and gone live.
I think that's excellent. There are two particular points I'd like to elaborate on, which was really good call out. And the first one was the finding that right balance. And I think that's exactly right. I think it's easily for an established and mature business to be overly regulated, which brings with it a slower momentum, rolling out software adoption or the change of processes and procedures. But at the opposite side of the spectrum, you have the kind of startup-y kind of atmosphere, which is not regulated enough, right? And then it becomes arguably too fast, disjointed. The direction tends to be a bit more fluffy. So it's finding that balance, and it's not exactly in the middle of too regulated and not enough. Sometimes it's a bit between, the too regulated and the midline between kind of chaotic. I think that's definitely something that shines through when you do, not necessarily for you guys in the BNY world, but typically just any business when you evaluate your current state, so your current processes, and you draw that current state analysis to then kind of map that to that future state and see where the gaps are, right? And I think it's a great opportunity to kind of look at how we do things and use these software implementations and rollouts of solutions such as Workfront to kind of improve upon and maybe simplify in some cases on what's done today. And a second piece you touched on, which was really interesting and very, very valid, was the visibility. And you mentioned it was caught up in emails, and I think that everyone should be able to relate to that. At the moment, especially, or more so with work from home, these process gaps are kind of now shining a lot brighter than they typically would. And a few months back, at the beginning of the year, you could easily pick up the phone, walk over to someone's desk, get find time and kind of discuss something, do it, and no one would be kind of the wiser, and it would just kind of fly under the radar. Whereas right now, things are a lot more apparent, and one of the reasons that should urge people to kind of focus or look more, take this kind of work from home situation as a kind of means to see how they can improve upon existing procedures. I do have one question for you, David, and that was around the trade-offs. And by trade-offs, I mean, what were you willing to accept in order to get the business up and running with Workfront?
Yeah, I mean, I guess on that point, did we get everything perfect? Absolutely not. Would I do things differently in some ways? Yes. So I think, in terms of the marketing teams themselves, where processes were, there were some mature processes and some didn't exist. I think we actually made a pretty good call in terms of saying, well, let's go with what we have. We refine where we can and kind of allow this to be kind of feedback led as to how it's running and loop that back in and make changes. So, without kind of overusing the term agile, I guess that is kind of an agile approach to that within our own realm. I think what we did do quite well with the compliance team and with sales teams is really sort of try to replicate, how things were done before. And, we've got a pretty stable situation. But what I think we could have done more of there was some more detailed kind of user acceptance testing. We obviously did do that, but I think that particularly around the reporting and the information side of it from their perspective, I think, yes, from our perspective, we were willing to accept it being a little bit scrappy to start with in some areas, as long as we were being completely compliant and following all the regulation. Whereas actually, probably our view of that was a little bit different. So I think it's really a case of what are the kind of bits that have to be spot on 100%, as I said earlier, versus those that you can work as a team on, and the impact of getting something wrong is a lot lower. So hopefully that answers your question, Kieran.
Perfect. So improve as people mature with the platform. That's excellent. Just mindful of time, I think we'll move to the next piece, which is where Ashley you'll be able to kind of provide some background context. The next slide, and before diving into the conversation itself, I'd just like to share a few figures just to give everyone a feel for the implementation that BNY Mellon have within the software ecosystem now. So firstly, this implementation was between 8 to 12 weeks roughly, give or take, with about 433 users in the system as of earlier this month, about 30 odd working groups and 9 external agencies, as you can read from the screen, and then a bunch of preloaded projects. Now the preloaded projects is an interesting point because it's projects that were already scheduled, and having them already pre-built out into the system allowed the guys to kind of just go through their day-to-day, get the adoption out the way, and then know straight away that all these projects are there waiting for them to kind of execute and enroll with. And I think that was one of the big drivers. And something else that's important to note is this was a global rollout. It's not just a small team. It's not your typical implementation of about 50, 60 people, depending on business. This is actually a global piece of work. So well done, Ashley, for all your great collaboration on this. Would you like to add anything to this particular slide, Ashley, or?
Yeah, I think there's just one thing really to clarify. So everybody might be a bit confused and say, well, how do you have 700 projects? That's a huge number. So, and it kind of highlights the amount of change that was coming, even just from implementing a system like Workfront, let alone kind of process changes and everything that come with that. So when we talk about projects, it was a whole different kind of terminology for the team to get on board with. So whenever we're using this throughout, a big part of this was even just identifying, well, what is a project? So for us, we identified it literally a series of tasks to get from A to B. So this might be the launch of a new website. It might be literally, the update of one of our standard presentations. It might be the creation of a new article. So those kind of things, that is an individual project.
Excellent. Excellent. And then
just Kieran, sorry, just to add one other point as well, in case anyone thinks we have the luxury of having 433 marketers. This is a broader network of people who can actually submit requests and so on. So unfortunately, we are not that blessed, in case anyone's envious out there.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, existing users. And Ashley, just for you, so because I know your journey, we went through it together, and you were hands-on, you were operational, you've done the majority of the process mapping, if not all of the process mapping on the back end before the actual build, so all that design work, and you did a fantastic job. But what challenges were you facing, did you realize and see whilst building out those process maps with the teams in preparation of this build and rollout? From an operational lens.
Yeah, I think the kind of as we were going through just various things leading up to us even looking into getting a wider workflow system, and everybody can probably relate to this, is that we kept having issues come up, or operational questions maybe, that we kept saying, well, we don't quite have those numbers, or we don't have the insight into that, even like if it's number of requests that are coming in for a certain group. And like, we say this over and over again, because that's all through email, you never have those numbers in front of you. So I think that's kind of what we were going towards, we're kind of leading up to looking at something like Workfront. We thought we really need that insight. And so that's kind of what was a lot of the challenge that we had before, that kind of triggered us looking at something like Workfront.
Excellent. What was your biggest fear going into this implementation, the build? What was your biggest fear? What popped up?
There are quite a lot of fears, but I think the main one was adoption. And especially when it came to, because we had to implement this. I mean, if you look at the dates there, obviously we were all working from home at that point. So we were implementing this virtually. So when it came down to adoption, it's not like you can be sitting next to someone or run over to people's desks to kind of help them out with a particular process, or even get a feel for a lot of the questions that are coming in. So adoption was definitely a big part. So we had to really put a lot of effort into the kind of online training and other kind of more virtual experiences that we could put there, and a lot more proactive kind of approach to getting a feel for how it's going and how adoption is.
Excellent. And in terms of teams, now I know we had lengthy conversations, but would you care sharing how that choice was made and why? So who was onboarded first, or why they were onboarded, that kind of phased rollout piece?
Yeah, we it pretty much changed all the time. I say, as we were leading up to, okay, first team's going live date. So to give a bit of background on it, what we did was we might touch on this later, is we did a phased rollout approach. So we went literally team by team. So every 2 weeks, a new group of teams would go live. And so we kind of grouped teams strategically on who worked most together and everything. But we tried to kind of make a list at the beginning of the project as we were mapping things out, and then that just started changing all the time. So at the end of it, we finally, a week before we're deciding to go live with the first team, we then it was very agile. We then had it down of, okay, we're going to go live with this team. And when it came down to it, it was really, okay, who's most ready, who had the processes mapped the best, all of their briefing documents, and all of their kind of predefined elements there, and kind of who were the teams that we had the most hurdles with, and we can kind of put those at the back of the go live to give us as most time as possible. And that actually just allowed us to go live pretty seamlessly then as we started to roll it out week by week. So we ended up going live first with the events team, and I think everybody probably will find this, that they have very set and defined processes. So they were a great team to go live with first, and it got our confidence levels up even as an implementation group.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. I think the events teams always have deadlines, and they're kind of used to that more project managery kind of approach. And so this was just a new interface, but same kind of logic. So that worked out really, really well. So I think workload, volume, difficulty, let's say process maturity were all key drivers in the selection of who goes first and when. And I think the only last thing, which I believe would kind of add value to everyone else on the call, was the biggest driver for team buy-in. What made people say, oh yeah, I see this as a good thing, the thing that kind of resonated most with teams? What would that be?
I think so David was speaking about it before, in terms of, we did this ways of working reviews. So we literally sat down with every single team globally and asked them, what are your biggest pain points? And we got some really good insights from there. We went really granular in what exactly is going wrong here. And we could keep coming back to that as we were rolling out Workfront. We weren't looking to implement tons of change all the processes as we're implementing it. We kind of keep it the same, because even implementing Workfront was enough change to kind of deal with for day one. But we could even say, okay, look, even by having the system here, it solves this, and this pain point that you told us about, 3 months ago, or whenever the Ways of Working project was. So that was really good, and they could easily see the benefits there and get that buy-in. But definitely at the end of the day, it kind of came down to getting it in everybody's objectives that you need to use Workfront. And if it's not in Workfront, it doesn't exist. And that was the biggest driver by far, I'd say, to get everybody using it.
Yeah, great philosophy. So the next slide talks about the current state. So basically, the usage of the platform today, several weeks after the last team have went live. And for that, we have a few figures. So currently in progress, 1,629 projects. And then just to echo Ashley's definition from a project, anything that has a sequential series of steps, deliverables, and time schedule and frames around it. So that is what's considered a project. And currently, yes, we've got 1,600 managed, about 375 per geo. And then we've got 548 planned projects, which means projects that have been reviewed internally, approved, potential budgets assigned, and so on, waiting in the system ready for people to execute. And that ties nicely to the topic. So execution, so knowing what process and what to follow, and also when, and driving consistency, right? And we'll talk more about that in the next slides. Actually, the one thing I found really, really interesting I'd like us to kind of talk about is the phase 2, the roadmap, in terms of workfront, and when these kind of tweaks and changes or enhancements would happen. Do you have anything you can mention on the call around roadmap or phase 2 pieces, or how did you approach that? How did you tackle that?
Yeah, so I think we've said it quite a lot. So we kept it as simple as possible for actual day one go live, and we kept processes kind of as they are today, or as much as possible. And that was actually really hard to hold back on, because you can see as you're doing the workfront training, you can see all the functionality that's there, and you can literally see, you can make tiny changes to process that will really help teams, but you really have to hold back because that change management and adoption piece is going to slow down as soon as you make those kind of changes. So really we had to stick to it as they are today. So we continue just to look at overall adoption of the platform and really getting that right. And then going forward, we can really start deep diving into all these different types of processes, tweaking them, making sure they're right, working with teams side by side, to make sure they're happy and we're working as efficiently as possible. And we've already started to see that today, as people are coming to us and saying, hey, we've been working with this process now for a while in Workfront. It would be great if maybe we could make this tweak and that will save, this person X amount of time. And so we've already seen that happen already, which is great to see. And as we move forward, now we're looking really as well to integrate Workfront into the rest of our infrastructure, kind of forming those integrations with other tools to really get the efficiencies there.
And I think that's key as well, right? It's having a solution that's scalable and that you can kind of, as the business matures with it, build out and scale internally. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe there's a phase 2 feature roadmap where you guys are kind of collecting feedback from everyone, reviewing, discussing with champions, logging those items to pick up at a later date. Is that correct?
Yeah, so even as we were just going through initial implementation, we were constantly making notes of kind of little improvements that could be made here and there. So that already gave us a really quick roadmap that we can start working towards, yeah.
Awesome. So that brings to the conclusion of that second section. So again, any questions for anyone on the call, for David, Ashley, or myself, feel free to post them through the chat right now. I'll just pause for a few seconds and I'll move on to the next and last section. And this last section will talk about the implementation, some of the steps we went through with BNY and with the implementation team in order to roll out a successful Workfront implementation. Now, on this particular slide, also want to illustrate here is that this was a dual effort. We took on the role of facilitators as part of Blueprint, and BNY done a fantastic job of dedicating a team, of which Ashley was the lead, to implement this solution and do that planning and preparation work. We spoke earlier on about understanding processes and how people work, how they operate, what software suites they use, what reports they pull, how they communicate internally. And it's all these kind of pieces and items that build that puzzle out for a successful implementation. It's very, very important to understand what people do, how they do it, and when they do it in order to figure out where those potential gaps are and how the technology can facilitate and improve both experience, but then also improve the process flows as a whole from a business value perspective. And so I think that duo kind of worked really nicely. I think at the beginning it was continual calls, daily calls, catching up, having a chat, walking through the system, walking through some of the process maps, taking off the requirements, putting forward some suggestions, and then planning out the design of the actual solution. Ashlyn, is there anything you'd like to share on that particular piece, or did you feel I've recapped that okay?
Yeah, I think so. I think that was, especially as we've now kind of implemented it and we're just working by ourselves in BNY with the system, really, that was a really important piece. Otherwise, I think it would have been tough going forward. I think getting, your people within whoever's implementing it really trained up and understanding the system to the point that, I feel really comfortable with it now. I think it took a bit more time then to implement the system, but really important now as we're going forward and kind of looking to develop it more, to have that knowledge in-house.
I think that's bang on. It's about making mistakes early on, in the early days of the platform, learning from those, getting as much exposure as possible to then become a better champion as a solution unfolds. This last slide, before we tackle some process maps, is around the phased rollout. So basically, where we organised this implementation was through several sprints. Within each sprint, there were several teams, and the teams were then prioritised according to the points we raised earlier about volume, process, readiness, for example. And having those sprints overlap allowed us to ensure that, first of all, there was a fast go live where everyone's up to speed as fast as possible, but also that the services who are dependent on each other could interact as soon as possible within the platform. And I feel that was a really good approach and part of the success of this rollout. Again, to echo David's comments from earlier, getting up and running as soon as possible. It's not about perfection. When you can get the majority of the work done with 70 or 80%, go for it, get up, fail fast, tweak, change, and then improve from there. Okay. The next slide is same process map as we saw before, the cross-functional process map. I just want to kind of talk through some of those points again. So these are the typical issues and risks that we see within this particular process, so campaign execution. For example, we're talking about lack of visibility, inconsistent workflows, people chasing requirements through different channels and different tools, and the overall it's not chaotic as such, but slow pace of potential work. Again, with different systems, for example, people might use, on one side Excel, and they might have these really, elaborate Excel spreadsheets with elements of project management, and some others might just have a simple post-it note checklist, and it's kind of information is living in different areas and spaces. I think that's kind of what I've tried to illustrate with this slide here, using some of the Microsoft tech stack. So, for example, PDFs are exchanged, annotations are made, the communication is siloed in email exchange. Someone else will receive a different trail of that email. They'll annotate on their end, and then kind of collating all that information is tricky. We've got the email clients in there again. All it takes is for someone to share that email to someone else, and someone will be left out the loop. And before you know, you have parallel conversations, each one addressing different topics for the same piece of work. Right? So it kind of creates a bit of a mess and how to wiggle through information. PowerPoints, Excel spreadsheets, again. All the information, same project, but kind of spread all over the place. And ideally, what we want to do is kind of unify all that, and that's something that Workfront is a great tool for. It aligns the business processes and procedures in one common place, and allows us to focus on the work rather than the different tools and so on. Keeping all the information siloed in one environment. Again, facilitating communication, better visibility, reporting. We know who's working on what, when, how, and why. Now, for that, I'll just start going through some of the screenshots here, just so people can kind of see what we're talking about. In this example here, we've digitalized the briefs for all marketing asset types or tactics into this format here. We refer to this as a custom form. It's essentially a digital brief. That means that it's consistent and the same for everyone. There's no version 1, version 2, version 3, or some draft version that's floating around. Everyone has access to the same piece of information and needs to input the information against mandatory fields in order for that work to be pushed through and accepted by the relevant marketing departments or teams. Actually, I believe, and this is a great example because you raised something with me a few weeks ago around the pace of change and how you guys will manage to influence behavior by updating this custom form. Is that something you'd like to raise now, or?
Yeah, so we had we've never, we had so many different briefing forms on various Word documents flying around everywhere, and Kieran put it well there that you have version 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you don't quite know which version to use. And this is great for us because actually having them in a digital format now, and having those fields in a back-end database within Workfront allows us to build these out really quickly now. So we had an example where, we had a process change come up. And because of that before, it would have taken us a while to create, change that Word document, get the comms out to everyone, say, please use this version now. You're probably going back and forth with everyone for a bit. And in this scenario, you quickly build the briefing form within Workfront, test that with the team, make sure they're happy. It goes live and everybody's using the right version, and you've got your new process in place already. So it does allow you to pivot really quickly, is what we've found so far.
So tying this back to consistency, do you feel that was easier to roll out and provide people with the correct process and allow them to execute consistently?
Yeah, exactly. It all comes down to that, really. You're not being sent the wrong version. Everybody's happy, using the same fields, and even across processes, it allows you to be consistent in your reporting on these briefs. So, for example, it might be a digital brief for the digital team, or one for, say, presentations team. Well, if you've got the same field in both of those, all of a sudden you can pull one common report on both of those as well, and that's been really useful.
Awesome. The next piece is around the queues. So within the Workfront environment, this is basically the catch-all for all requests. So in this case, marketing campaign request queue, people would submit these digital briefs, and these would be collected in this kind of bucket, right? And that would allow the teams to dial in, have a look at what's come through, review the requirements, and then update people, so the requesters, for example, a sales team, on potential due dates or any information, additional requirements, or maybe just kind of reach out and ask for a little bit more insight into what's expected. Ashley, what was your experience with that, with the request queue feature and kind of capturing all marketing requests in those dedicated queues? Do you feel that? Yeah,
no, it's worked very well. And I think having just all those requests in one place, the big part for us, obviously, in ops is like, okay, we can actually measure these and they're not over email anymore. So that's been a big part.
Excellent. So again, great to keep everyone aligned and following the same process, one place to kind of govern with everything. We spoke about consistency, and this is one of the great features within Workfront, and we kind of touched on it earlier on. But within Workfront, you have these project templates. So it's essentially a workflow, a series of steps, a series of tasks assigned to individuals that we can pre-build within the system based off the process, current state process collection in the planning phase. That means we take the current state, how people operate, make some adjustments to kind of streamline, simplify the processes, and then build that out within the system. It means that when every request comes through, you have a selection of project templates, and so you can choose the relevant template for the relevant request, encouraging people to be consistent and executing or following the right workflows throughout the system and throughout the work. And this is an example of this, right? So here you can see, for example, we have in bold what we call parent tasks, and this would be a standard workflow where there are dedicated people assigned to them in this particular case, along with a project status, which is at the very top of the screen, and then a project navigation bar to the left-hand side. Within these templates, you can complement the view of different information. We have, for example, planned hours, we have scheduled hours, expected durations, predecessors, allowing people to kind of better organize their work. And what's more important is once people are assigned to these projects, they have a task list, right? They can log into the system, they know what they need to work on it, when they need to work on it, and who they need to communicate and work with in parallel. Again, providing that one-stop shop for all things workflow and process. And then the next slide is one level up. So this would be the portfolio and program management group. There are multiple ways to run with this, but essentially at a highest level, if you wanted to, you could manage your marketing budget and your project and program budget, granting greater visibility into the ROI, for example. We could also discuss the integration with a platform such as Marketo. So upon the creation of a new Marketo campaign, it would automatically create a project in Workfront, or vice versa, and then populate the fields so we know exactly how much, which campaigns are performing better than others. So cost management, budget management, really, really powerful and effective tools, along with other things such as, for example, a portfolio optimization tool, which allows you to prioritize your projects based on a campaign scorecard. I think we kind of ran and hit the end of the session now anyway. We'll catch up with you afterwards, David and Helen, for questions, and then try and get back to everyone. And as a reminder, the white paper will be sent out to all participants, everyone who's registered, tomorrow early afternoon, along with the recording and the slide deck as well.
Yeah, I think, Kieran, as you said, if anyone wants to connect with us with questions directly as well, we're more than happy to receive them.
There you go, perfect.
Thank you all. It's Helen Danzy, producer for the forum here, given that David's having a few problems with his audio. I've just jumped on to say a massive thank you to Kieran, to David and to Ashley. Incredibly insightful and incredibly detailed. These case studies are the lifeblood of the forum and the forum's members. A very big thank you to you all. And if I think we've got your contact details, so if anybody's got any direct questions, we can put them through straight to you. In the meantime, everybody have a great afternoon, and thank you again for joining us at the forum.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.